Chapter 2, Parts 3 and 3a of A Contribution to the Critique of Political Economy by Karl Marx, translated by Nahum Isaac Stone. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 2, Part 3. Money, as distinguished from coin, the result of the circulation process C to M to C, forms the starting point of the circulation process M to C to M, that is, the exchange of money for commodity in order to exchange commodity for money. In the form C to M to C, commodity forms the starting and final points of the movement. In the form M to C to M, money plays that part. In the former case, money is the medium of exchange of commodities. In the latter, the commodity helps money to become money. Money, which appears merely as a means of circulation in the first form, becomes an end in the second form, while commodity, which appeared first as the end, now becomes but a means. Since money is itself the result of circulation, C to M to C, the result of circulation appears at the same time as its starting point in the form M to C to M. While in the case of C to M to C, the interchange of matter constituted the real import of the process, the form of the commodity resulting from this first process constitutes the import of the second process, M to C to M. In the form C to M to C, the two extreme members are commodities of the same value, but qualitatively different use values. Their mutual exchange, C to C, constitutes actual interchange of matter. In the form M to C to M, the two extremes are gold, and at the same time gold of equal value. To exchange gold for a commodity in order to exchange the commodity for gold, or if we consider the final result, M to M, to exchange gold for gold, seems absurd. But if we translate the formula M to C to M, enter the expression to buy in order to sell, which means nothing but to exchange gold for gold through an intervening movement, we recognize at once the prevailing form of capitalist production. In actual practice, however, people do not buy in order to sell, but they buy cheap in order to sell dear. Money is exchanged for a commodity in order to exchange the same commodity for a larger amount of money, so that the extremes M are, if not qualitatively, then quantitatively different. Such a quantitative difference presupposes the exchange of non-equivalents, yet commodity and money as such are only opposite forms of the same commodity, that is, they are different forms of the same magnitude of value. The circuit M to C to M thus conceals, under the forms of money and commodity, more highly developed relations of production, and is but a reflection within the sphere of simple circulation of a movement of a more advanced character. Money, as distinguished from the medium of circulation, must therefore be developed from the direct form of circulation of commodities C to M to C. Gold, that is, the specific commodity which serves as a measure of value and a medium of circulation, becomes money without any further assistance on the part of society. In England, where silver is neither the measure of value nor the prevailing medium of circulation, it does not become money, just as gold in Holland, as soon as it had been dethroned as a measure of value, ceased to be money. A commodity thus becomes money only in its combined capacity of a measure of value and medium of circulation, or the unity of the measure of value and medium of circulation is money. As such a unity, however, gold has a separate existence, independent of its existence in the two functions. As a measure of value, it is only ideal money and ideal gold. As a mere medium of circulation, it is symbolic money and symbolic gold. But in its plain, metallic, bodily form, gold is money, or money is real gold. Let us now consider for a moment the commodity gold when it is in a state of rest and plays the part of money in its relation to other commodities. All commodities represent in their prices a certain quantity of gold, that is to say, they are merely imaginary gold or imaginary money, representatives of gold, just as, on the other hand, money in the form of a token of value appeared as a mere representative of prices of commodities. Footnote: A. Genovese, Lezioni di Economia Civile, 1765, page 281. Custody parte, mode L8. Not only are precious metals tokens of things, but vice versa, things are tokens of gold and silver. End of footnote. Since all commodities are thus but imaginary money, money is the only real commodity, contrary to commodities which only represent the independently existing exchange value, that is, universal social labor or abstract wealth. Gold is the material form of abstract wealth. Through its use value, every commodity, by its relation to some particular want, expresses only one aspect of material wealth, but one side of wealth. Money, however, satisfies every want, since it can be directly converted into the object of any want. Its own use value is realized in the endless series of use values which form its equivalents. In its virgin metallic state, it holds locked up all the material wealth which lies unfolded in the world of commodities. Thus, while commodities represent in their prices the universal equivalent or abstract wealth, viz. Gold, the latter represents in its use value the use values of all commodities. Gold is therefore the bodily representative of material wealth. It is the précis de tous les choses, Bois Guilbert, the compendium of the wealth of society. At one and the same time, it is the direct incarnation of universal labor in its form, and the aggregate of all concrete labor in its substance. It is universal wealth individualized. Footnote: petty, gold and silver are universal wealth. Political Arithmetic, L.C., page 242. End of footnote. As a medium of circulation, it underwent all kinds of injury, was clipped, and even reduced to the condition of a mere symbolic paper rag. As money, it is restored to its golden glory. Footnote: E. Misselden, Free Trade or the Means to Make Trade Flourish, etc., London, 1622. The natural matter of commerce is merchandise, which merchants from the end of trade have styled commodities. The artificial matter of commerce is money, which hath obtained the title of sinews of war and of state. Money, though it be in nature and time after merchandise, yet, forasmuch as it is now in use, become the chief. Page 7. He compares his own treatment of merchandise and money with the manner of old Jacob, who, blessing his grandchildren, crossed his hands and laid his right hand on the younger and his left hand on the elder. L.C. Bois Guilbert, page 395, 399. End of footnote. From a serf, it becomes a lord. From a mere understrapper, it rises to the position of lord of commodities. Footnote: Bois Guilbert, L.C., page 395. Part 3a. Hoarding. Gold separates itself as money from the process of circulation whenever a commodity interrupts the process of its metamorphosis and remains in its form of a gold chrysalis. This occurs every time a sale is not immediately followed by purchase. The independent isolation of gold as money is thus a material expression of the disintegration of the process of circulation or of the metamorphosis of commodities into two separate acts independent of each other. The coin itself becomes money as soon as its course is interrupted in the hands of the seller who takes it in exchange for his commodity. It is money and not coin. As soon as it passes out of his hands, it is again coin. Everybody is a seller of the one commodity which he produces, but a buyer of all other commodities which he needs for his existence in society. While his selling is determined by the labor time required for the production of his commodity, his buying is determined by the continual renewal of the wants of life. In order to be able to buy without having sold anything, he must sell without buying. In fact, the circulation process C to M to C is a dynamic unity of sale and purchase only insofar as it constitutes at the same time the constant process of its separation. In order that money should flow continuously as coin, coin must constantly coagulate as money. The continuous flow of coin depends on its constant accumulations in the form of reserve funds of coin, which spring up throughout the sphere of circulation and form sources of supply. The formation and distribution, disappearance and reformation of these reserve funds is constantly changing. Their existence constantly disappears. Their disappearance constantly exists. Adam Smith expressed this never-ceasing transformation of coin into money and of money into coin by saying that every owner of commodities must always keep in supply, besides the particular commodity which he sells, a certain quantity of the universal commodity with which he buys. We saw that in the process C to M to C, the second member M to C splits up into a series of purchases which do not take place at once, but at intervals of time, so that one part of M circulates as money, while the other rests as money. Money is in that case only suspended coin, and the separate parts of the circulating mass of coins appear now in one form, now in another, constantly changing. This first transformation of the medium of circulation into money represents therefore but a technical aspect of money circulation. Footnote: in the first halt of the perpetuum mobile, that is, in the suspension of the function of money as a medium of circulation, Bois-Guilbert at once suspects its independent existence from commodities. Money, he says, must be in constant motion. It can be money only by being mobile, but as soon as it becomes motionless, all is lost. What he overlooks is that this halt constitutes the condition of its movement. What he really wants is that the value form of commodities should appear merely in the transitory form of their change of matter, but should never become an end in itself. End of footnote. The primitive form of wealth is that of a surplus or superabundance, that is, that part of the products which are not immediately required as use values, or the possession of such products whose use value falls outside the sphere of mere necessaries. When considering the transition of commodity into money, we saw that this surplus or superabundance of products constitutes the proper sphere of exchange at a low stage of development of production. Superfluous products become exchangeable products or commodities. The adequate form of this surplus is gold and silver, the first form in which wealth as abstract social wealth is preserved. Commodities can not only be stored up in the form of gold and silver, that is, in the substance of money, but gold and silver are wealth in preserved form. While every use value performs its service as such by being consumed, that is, destroyed, the use value of gold as money consists in its being the bearer of exchange value, in embodying universal labor time as a shapeless raw material. As shapeless metal, exchange value possesses an indestructible form. Gold or silver, thus brought to rest as money, forms a hoard. Among nations with an exclusively metallic circulation, such as the ancients were, hoarding is practiced universally from the individual to the state which guards its state hoard. In more ancient times than Asia and Egypt, these hordes under the protection of kings and priests appear rather as a mark of their power. In Greece and Rome, it was part of public policy to accumulate state hordes as the safest and most available form of surplus. The quick transfer of such hordes by conquerors from one country to another, and the sudden outpour of a part of these hordes into the general circulation, constitute a peculiar feature of ancient economy. As the incarnation of labor time, gold is a pledge for its own value, and since it is the embodiment of universal labor time, the process of circulation pledges gold its constant role of exchange value. Owing to the mere fact that the owner of commodities can retain his commodity in the form of exchange value, or retain the exchange value as a commodity, the exchange of commodities for the purpose of retaining them in the transformed shape of gold becomes circulation's own motive. The metamorphosis of C to M takes place for the sake of the metamorphosis, that is, in order to transform it from particular natural wealth into universal social wealth. Instead of change of matter, change of form becomes its own purpose. From a mere form of the movement, exchange value becomes its substance. Commodity is preserved as wealth, as commodity only in so far as it keeps within the sphere of circulation, and it keeps in that fluent state only in so far as it solidifies in the form of silver and gold. It remains in the stream of circulation as its crystal. At the same time, gold and silver themselves become money only in so far as they do not play the part of mediums of circulation. As non-mediums of circulation, they become money. The withdrawal of a commodity from circulation in the form of gold is therefore the only means of keeping it constantly within the sphere of circulation. The owner of commodities can receive money from circulation only in return for a commodity which he gives to it. Constant selling, continual throwing of commodities into circulation is therefore the first condition of hoarding from the standpoint of the circulation of commodities. On the other hand, money as a medium of circulation constantly disappears in the very process of circulation by being realized all the time in use values and becoming dissolved in fleeting pleasures. It must therefore be taken out of the all-consuming stream of circulation, or the commodity must be kept up in its first metamorphosis, so that money is prevented from performing its function of a means of purchase. The commodity owner, who has now become a hoarder, must sell as much as possible, and buy as little as possible, as old Cato had taught, patrem familias vendacem non e macem esse. While industry constitutes the positive condition of hoarding, saving forms the negative one. The less the equivalent of a commodity is withdrawn from circulation in the form of particular commodities or use values, the more it is withdrawn in the shape of money or exchange value. Footnote: the more the stock is increased in wares, the more it decreaseth in treasure. E. Misselden, L.C., page 23. End of footnote. The acquisition of wealth in its universal form thus requires abstinence from wealth in its material reality. Thus the stimulating impulse for hoarding is greed, the objects of which are not commodities as use values, but exchange value as commodity. In order to get possession of the surplus in its universal form, the particular wants must be treated as so much luxury and excess. Thus the courts presented a report to Philip II in 1593, in which, among other things, was said, the courts of Valladolid in the year 1586 petitioned your majesty not to allow the further importation into the kingdom of candles, glassware, jewelry, knives, and similar articles. These things, useless to human life, come from abroad to be exchanged for gold as though the Spaniards were Indians. The hoarder despises the worldly, temporary, and transitory enjoyments in his hunt after the eternal treasure which neither moth nor rust can eat, which is perfectly celestial and earthly at the same time. The general remote cause of our want of money is the great excess of this kingdom in consuming the commodities of foreign countries, which prove to us discommodities and hindering us of so much treasure which otherwise would be brought in lieu of those toys We consume amongst us that great abundance of the wines of Spain, of France, of the Rhone, and of the Levant. The raisins of Spain, the currants of the Levant, the lawns and cambrics of Hainaults, the silks of Italy, the sugars and tobacco of the West Indies, the spices of the East Indies, all which are of no necessity unto us, and yet are bought with ready money. Footnote LCP 11 through 13 Passon. End of footnote. In the form of gold and silver, wealth is indestructible, both because exchange value is preserved in the shape of indestructible metal, and especially because gold and silver are prevented from becoming, as mediums of circulation, mere vanishing money forms of the commodity. The destructible substance is thus sacrificed for the indestructible form. If money is taken by means of taxation from him who spendeth the same upon eating and drinking, or any other perishing commodity, and the same transferred to one that bestoweth it on clothes, I say that even in this case the commonwealth has some little advantage, because clothes do not altogether perish so soon as meats and drinks. But if the same be spent in furniture of houses, the advantage is yet a little more; if in building of houses, yet more; if in improving of lands, working of mines, fishing, etc., yet more; but most of all in bringing gold and silver into the country, because those things are not only not perishable, but are esteemed for wealth at all times and everywhere, whereas other commodities which are perishable, or whose value depends upon the fashion, or which are contingently scarce and plentiful, are wealth, but pro hic et nunc. Footnote. Petty Political Arithmetic, LC, page 196, 1899 edition, V1, page 269, trans. End of footnote. The withdrawal of money from the stream of circulation and the saving of it from the social interchange of matter reaches its extreme form in the burying of money, so that social wealth is brought as an underground indestructible treasure into a perfectly secret private relation with the owner of commodities. Dr. Bernier, who stayed for some time at the court of Aurangzeb at Delhi, tells us how the merchants, especially the Mohammedan heathens who control nearly all the trade and all money, secretly bury their money deep in the ground, being imbued with the faith that the gold and silver which they put away during their lives will serve them after death in the next world. Footnote. François Bernier, Voyage contenant la description des états du Grand Mogul, Paris edition 1830, T. L. Conf. P. 312-314. End of footnote. However, insofar as the asceticism of the hoarder is combined with active industry, he is rather a Protestant by religion and still more a Puritan. It cannot be denied that bearing and selling are necessary, that one cannot get along without them, and that one can buy, like a Christian, especially things that serve in need and in honor. For the patriarchs had also bought and sold cattle, wool, grain, butter, milk, and other goods. They are gifts of God, which he gives out of the earth and divides among men. But foreign trade, which brings over from Calcutta, India, and other such places commodities consisting of costly silks and gold ware and spices which only serve for luxury and are of no use, draining the land and the people of their money, should not be tolerated if we but had a government of princes. Yet I do not wish to write of that now, for I believe it will have to stop of itself when we have no money any longer, and so will luxury and gluttony, for no writing or teaching will help until want and poverty will force us. Footnote. Dr. Martin Luther, Bucher von Kaufhandel und Wucher, 1524. In the same passage, Luther says, in the work quoted above, Misselden wishes to retain the gold and silver at least within the confines of Christendom. The other foreign remote causes of the want of money are the trades maintained out of Christendom to Turkey, Persia, and the East Indies, which trades are maintained for the most part with ready money, yet in a different manner from the trades of Christendom within itself. For although the trades within Christendom are driven with ready moneys, yet those moneys are still contained within the bounds of Christendom. There is indeed a fluxus and refluxus, a flood and ebb of the moneys of Christendom traded within itself, for sometimes there is more in one part of Christendom, sometimes there is less in another. As one country wanteth and another aboundeth, it cometh and goeth and whirleth about the circle of Christendom, but is still contained within the compass thereof. but the money that is traded out of Christendom into the parts of aforesaid is continually issued out and never returneth again. Page 19 to 20. End of footnote. In times of disturbance in the process of the social interchange of matter, the burying of money takes place even in bourgeois societies, which are at a high stage of development. The social bond in its compact form is being saved from the social movement with the owner of commodities. This bond is the commodity, and the adequate form of the commodity is money. The social nervus rerum is buried next to the body whose nerve it is. The hoard would now become mere useless metal. Its money soul would depart from it, and it would remain as the burnt ashes of circulation, as its caput mortuum, if it did not constantly tend to get back into circulation. Money, or crystallized exchange value, is according to its nature the form of abstract wealth, but on the other hand, any given sum of money is a quantitatively limited magnitude of value. The quantitative limitation of exchange value is in contradiction with its qualitative universality, and the hoarder conceives in it a barrier which turns in fact into a qualitative barrier, as well as makes of the hoard merely a limited representative of material wealth. Money, in its capacity of a universal equivalent, appears, as we have seen, as a member of an equation, the other member of which consists of an endless series of commodities. It depends on the magnitude of the exchange value to what extent money will be realized in such an endless series, that is, to what degree it corresponds to the conception of it as an exchange value. The automatic movement of exchange value as exchange value can only tend to its passing beyond its quantitative limits, but by exceeding the quantitative limits of the hoard, a new limit is created which must be removed in its turn. There is no definite limit which appears as a barrier to further hoarding. Every limit plays that part. Hoard accumulation has therefore no inherent limits, no inherent measure. It is an endless process which finds in each successive result an impulse for a new beginning. While the hoard is increased only by being preserved, it is preserved only by being increased. Money is not only an object of the passion for riches, it is the object of that passion. The latter is essentially auri sacra fames. The passion for riches, contrary to that for special kinds of natural wealth or use values, such as clothing, ornaments, herds, etc., is possible only when universal wealth has been individualized as such in a particular object, and can therefore be retained in the form of a single commodity. Money appears then no less as an object than as a source of the passion for riches. Footnote: Pliny, Natural History, L. 33, C. 14. End of footnote. The underlying fact of the matter is that exchange value is such, and with it its increase become the final aim. Greed holds the hoard fast by not allowing the money to become a medium of circulation, but the thirst for gold saves the money soul of the hoard by keeping up the lasting affinity of gold for circulation. To sum up, the activity of which hoards are built up resolves itself into withdrawal of money from circulation by continually repeated sales and simple hoarding or accumulation. In fact, it is only in the sphere of simple circulation, and especially in the form of hoarding, that accumulation of wealth as such takes place, while, as we shall see later, in the case of other so-called forms of accumulation, it is only a misnomer to call them by that name and mere recollection of the simple accumulation of money. All other commodities are hoarded either as use values, in which case the manner of storing them up is determined by the peculiarities of their use value. The storing of grain, for example, requires special equipment. The accumulation of sheep makes one a shepherd. The accumulation of slaves and land creates relations of master and servant, etc. The accumulation of particular kinds of wealth requires special processes different from the simple act of hoarding, and develops special individual traits. Or wealth in the form of commodities is hoarded as exchange value, and in that case hoarding appears as a commercial or a specific economic operation. The one who carries on such operations becomes a dealer in corn, in cattle, etc. Gold and silver are money, not through some activity of the individual who accumulates it, but as crystals of the process of circulation which goes on without any aid on his part. He has nothing to do but to put them aside, adding new weights of metal to his hoard, a perfectly senseless operation which, if applied to all other commodities, would deprive them of all value. Footnote: Horace thus understands nothing of the philosophy of hoarding when he says, if one buys fiddles, hoards them up when bought, though music's study ne'er engaged his thought, one lasts and alls unversed in cobbler's craft, one sails for ships not knowing fore from aft. You'd call them mad, but tell me, if you please, how that man's case is different from these, who, as he gets it, stows away his gain, and thinks to touch a farthing were profane. Translated by John Covington, London, 1874, page 60. Mr. Senior understands the question much better. Since money represents all other forms of wealth, it is only necessary to accumulate it to provide for oneself all kinds of wealth existing in the world. L.C. verse 2, page 134, end of footnote. Our hoarder appears as a martyr of exchange value, a holy ascetic, crowning the metal pillar. He cares for wealth only in its social form, and therefore he bears it away from society. He wants to have the commodity in the form in which it is always capable of entering circulation, and therefore he withdraws it from circulation. He dreams of exchange value, and therefore does not exchange. The fluid form of wealth and its petrification, the elixir of life and the stone of wisdom, madly haunt each other in alchemic fashion. In his imaginary, unlimited passion for enjoyment, he denies himself all enjoyment. Because he wishes to satisfy all social wants, he barely satisfies his elementary natural wants. While holding fast to his wealth in its metallic bodily form, the latter escapes him as a phantom. As a matter of fact, however, the hoarding of money for the sake of money is the barbaric form of production for production's sake, that is, the development of the productive forces of social labor beyond the limits of ordinary wants. The less the production of commodities is developed, the more important is the first crystallization of exchange value into money, or hoarding, which plays, therefore, an important part among the ancient nations in Asia until the present day, and among modern agricultural nations where exchange value has not as yet taken hold of all the relations of production. Before taking up the consideration of the specific economic function of hoarding within the sphere of metallic circulation, let us mention another form of hoarding. Quite apart from their aesthetic properties, silver and gold commodities are convertible into money, since the material of which they are made is a money material, and inversely, gold money and gold bullion can be converted into commodities. Because gold and silver constitute the material of abstract wealth, the greatest display of wealth consists of the utilization of these metals as concrete use values, and if the owner of commodities hides his treasure at certain stages of production, he is very anxious to appear before other owners of commodities as rico hombre whenever he can do so with safety. He gilds himself and his house. Footnote: to what extent the inner man of the commodity owner remains unchanged even when he has become civilized and has developed into a capitalist is shown by the example of a London representative of a cosmopolitan banking house who adopted as a fitting coat of arms for his family a £100,000 banknote, which he had hung up in a glass frame. The point here is in the mocking contempt of the note for circulation. End of footnote. In Asia, especially in India, where, unlike under the capitalist system, the hoarding of wealth appears not as a subordinate function of the system of production, but as an end in itself, gold and silver commodities are practically but aesthetic forms of hoards. In medieval England, gold and silver commodities were considered before the law as mere forms of treasure, since their value was but slightly increased by the crude labor spent upon them. They were destined to re-enter circulation, and their fineness was therefore prescribed in the same manner as that of coin. The increasing use of gold and silver as objects of luxury with the growth of wealth is such a simple matter that it was perfectly clear to the ancients. Footnote: see the passage from Xenophon quoted below. End of footnote. While modern economists have advanced the erroneous proposition that the use of silver and gold articles increases not in proportion to the growth of wealth, but in proportion to the fall in value of the precious metals, their otherwise accurate references to the use of Californian and Australian gold are inconclusive, since the increased consumption of gold as a raw material does not find justification, according to their theory, in any corresponding decline in its value. From 1810 to 1830, in consequence of the struggle of the American colonies against Spain and the interruption of mining caused by revolutions, the annual average production of precious metals declined by more than one-half. The decline of coin in circulation in Europe amounted to nearly one-sixth, comparing the years 1829 and 1809, although the quantity produced had thus declined, and the cost of production, if it had changed at all, had increased, yet the consumption of precious metals as objects of luxury increased to an extraordinary extent in England during the very war, and on the continent after the Peace of Paris. The consumption increased with the general growth of wealth. Footnote: Jacob L.C. Volume 2, Chapter 25 and 26. End of footnote. It may be stated as a general law that the conversion of gold and silver money into articles of luxury prevails in times of peace, while their reconversion into bullion or even coin takes place in stormy periods. Footnote: In times of great agitation and insecurity, especially during internal commotions or invasions, gold and silver articles are rapidly converted into money, whilst during periods of tranquility and prosperity, money is converted into plate and jewelry. L.C. Volume 2, page 357. End of footnote. How considerable the proportion is of the gold and silver treasure in the form of articles of luxury to the quantity of precious metals serving as money may be seen from the fact that in 1829 the proportion in England, according to Jacob, was 2 to 1, and in entire Europe and America the precious metals in the form of articles of luxury exceeded those in the form of money by 1/4. We have seen that the circulation of money is but the manifestation of the metamorphoses of commodities, or of the form under which the social interchange of matter takes place. With the change in the total price of commodities in circulation, or in the volume of their simultaneous metamorphoses, the rapidity of their change of form in each case being given, the total quantity of gold in circulation must always expand or contract. That is possible only under the condition that the total quantity of money in the country continually bear a varying ratio to the quantity of money in circulation. This condition is met by the process of hoarding. With a fall in prices or rise in the rapidity of circulation, the hoard reservoirs absorb that part of money which is thrown out of circulation. With a rise in price or a decline in the rapidity of circulation, the hoards open up and return a part of their contents to the stream of circulation. The solidification of circulating money into hoards and the outpouring of hoards into circulation is a constantly oscillating movement in which the prevalence of the one or the other tendency is determined exclusively by fluctuations in the circulation of commodities. Hoards thus serve as conduits for the supply and withdrawal of money to or from circulation, so that every time only that quantity of money circulated as coins which is required by the immediate needs of circulation. If the volume of the entire circulation suddenly expands, and the fluent unity of sale and purchase assumes such dimensions that the total sum of prices to be realized increases more rapidly than the rapidity of the circulation of money, the hoards decrease perceptibly. But when the combined movement slackens to an unusual extent, or the movement of buying and selling steadies itself, the medium of circulation solidifies into money in large measure, and the treasure reservoirs fill up far above their average level. In countries with an exclusively metallic circulation, or where production is at a low stage of development, the hoards are endlessly split up and scattered all over the land, while in countries where the capitalist system is developed, they are concentrated in bank reservoirs. Hoards are not to be confounded with coin reservoirs, which form a constituent part of the total supply of money in circulation, while the interaction between hoards and currency implies the decline or rise of its total supply. Gold and silver commodities form, as we have seen, both conduits for the withdrawal of precious metals as well as sources of their supply. In ordinary times only their former function is of importance to the economy of metallic circulation. Footnote: Xenophon de Vectigallibus c. 4. Of all operations with which I am acquainted, this is the only one in which no sort of jealousy is felt at a further development of the industry. The larger the quantity of ore discovered, and the greater the amount of silver extracted, the greater the number of persons ready to engage in the operation. No one, when he has got a sufficient furniture for his house, dreams of making further purchases on this head but of silver. No one ever yet possessed so much that he was forced to cry enough. On the contrary, if ever anybody does become possessed of an immoderate amount, he finds as much pleasure in digging a hole in the ground and hoarding it as an actual employment of it. When a state is prosperous, there is nothing which people so much desire as silver. The men want money to expend on most beautiful armor and fine horses and houses of and sumptuous paraphernalia of all sorts. The women betake themselves to expensive apparel and ornaments of gold. Or when states are sick, either through barrenness of corn and other fruits, or through war, the demand for current coin is even more imperative, whilst the ground lies unproductive to pay for necessities or military aid. Translation by H. G. Dakins, London, 1892, Volume 2, Revenues, page 335 to 336. Aristotle develops in Book 1, Chapter 9 of his Politics the two opposite movements of circulation, CMC and MCM, calling them economics and chromatistics, respectively. The two forms are represented by the Greek tragedian Euripides as Siccan, right, and Kyotos, prophet. End of footnote. End of chapter 2, parts 3 and 3a.